Hey, and welcome back. This is the Marketer of the Day podcast. Brendan Kenny is here from hjlawfirm.com. And Brendan is a seasoned litigator. He has 17 years experience in administrative, state, federal, and appellate courts. And Brendan is a sought-after speaker and writer on legal writing, e-discovery, trial practice, storytelling, and all things persuasion. As you get to know Brendan in our conversation here, you're just going to get a feeling of how he likes writing, he likes expressing, he likes fun, he likes the humor, and we can all use some of that into communicating with our audience and also just being a more interesting person and coming alive and rising above the noise. So, Brendan, wonderful speaking with you.
Thanks for having me. That's a tall order to fill that bio.
It is, but we will set our expectations high and then deliver even further. And so that's kind of me and my first impression of you. But what are you all about? What's the elevator pitch? What's your focus and passion?
Well, I just start off and say, like, there's three key things I think that drive everything I do. Is that really challenge is the greatest engine for growth. There's no such thing as a failure. There's only failed strategies. And that, to quote the line from It's a Wonderful Life, no man is a failure if he has friends. And so that's sort of like three things I'd say like undergird kind of everything I do. Yeah, I guess this is a strange thing to say. Maybe the audience is going to be, why do we want to hear from someone who's talking about failure as being a great thing? But I think I've learned the most from failure in life. And the first thing I think is the reason I'm a lawyer is because for some reason, I'm not sure why, I kind of always felt how hard it is to convince someone of anything and even get anyone to listen. I don't have some crazy traumatic childhood or something, but those are just two key things that were always with me. And I think the reason I like doing what I'm doing is that those are the two things I'm trying to do in most things I'm doing when I'm writing. I'm trying to get someone first to listen, the judge usually, sometimes even opposing counsel, because sometimes I'm writing something to kind of tweak them, to get them to over-respond or make a mistake in their response, but mostly the judge. And then I'm trying to convince them of something. And that's sort of the best I can think of is the most salient experience I have in my life that I think affected that is when I was a kid, maybe I was 7 or 8, I'm from California, so I was going to an A's game. We had a friend who was a former A's pro player. His name's Rick Bassetti. He's still up in Redding, where I grew up. And I was going down with a number of people, and someone who was just kind of a jerk kid accused me of stealing something from the store to me. And I said, I didn't steal. And he kept saying I was stealing, telling other people I stole. And I just was like, how would you disprove something like this? And that's just sort of been with me my whole life.
I love
yeah. So that's sort of the basis, kind of my origin story, I think, as a lawyer and as a persuader. It comes from those sorts of things. And I guess in terms of the greatest engine of growth, being failure, I don't know. I've always been a person of extremes in terms of having things I'm good at, or at least I perceived as those, and things I wasn't. And I really was not a very good athlete at all. And luckily, some of those lack of athletic abilities, I feel like I took one for the team for my kids, because it seems like all of my kids have some athletic ability. I have 6 kids, ages 13 to 3, and they all seem to have some athletic ability. So I'm glad that I took all the bad genes on athletics. But I guess, at least for me, I always had the experience of having something that was a real challenge. And as a result, maybe it creates something to overcome. I could just say that, like, compared to maybe some of my peers, I don't have any sort of special, like I said, traumatic or downwardly mobile or in any way kind of economically challenged background. But I just always felt like there was something to overcome, something that needed to be done. And I find that especially in writing, that's really hugely important, because at least for me, some people are different. I have talked to people who are different, but for me, every writing project, I have a part of crisis where I just want to throw my computer or throw my notepad or throw something out the window. Nothing's working out. It's never going to work out. I'm going against the grain, and that just happens every time. But I've learned to walk through that, and I over time get it improved product.
Right. And failure leads to success in many ways, right? In a lifetime way, but also in this whole writing process, right? Like your writing needs to take a certain shape. It needs to be complete, needs to be long enough, short enough. And then what I kind of made a mental note with you is there's like two steps in the process, right? There's getting someone's attention and then changing or pointing their mind in a certain way. And both ingredients are important and one needs to come before the other, and it takes a lot of finesse and nuance to figure that out, and
Yeah.
you need to navigate a lot of different things, right? You have to be interesting and be unexpected, and you can't just do a straightforward kind of a delivery. You have to wake people up and get people to notice, and many times with either the failure or the limitations or the negatives is a great way, especially in the beginning of writing, focusing on the problems, focusing on what didn't work. That is what is exciting and interesting. And that's where the drama is, right? Like if you watch a
Yeah.
movie, if everything worked great in the first half of the movie and there was no problems at all, you'd say this is a really boring movie. But if you
Yeah.
watch a movie where there's disaster, failure, problems, stress, and then that ends up leading to something, then that is a lot more interesting. And so, and also, since we're here on a marketing podcast, I always think about this idea that like marketing and like salesmanship, especially, is about taking something that might be dull or boring on first glance and making it interesting. And so it seems like that's a lot of what you do with your writing, right? Some of these
Yes.
legal subjects, I'm sure, are just like really dry, but you have to make it exciting for the person reading. And you also have to excite yourself, right? You have to get yourself
Yes.
interested and invested in what you're saying.
Yes, that's utterly true and totally true. I mean, the way I try to, look at it is, I don't think legal writing is art, but I think it can be as close as to art as something that isn't art. And the only reason I say it's not art is because no one's free not to respond. You file a motion, the other side has to respond. But I think, yeah, that's really the point is that it really goes back to Aristotle. You've got the logos, you got the pathos, and you have the ethos, right? So you have the three aspects. And lawyers are great at the logos, the logic part. They lose the pathos, and a lot of times they lose credibility for themselves and their client in their writing and in other things. So they lose the ethos part. And so I think you have to have all three, and you have to tell a story, and you have to do it in such a way. And this is, I'm sure I've been guilty of on the wrong side of this, but you have to do it in such a way that's not totally self-referential and makes it about you showing off. I should say, I shouldn't do it where it's about me showing off. And that's a fine line, if you're gonna, I did have a brief where at the very beginning, it was a probate matter about a family dispute. And I did quote the line from Anna Karenina, all happy families are alike, and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. But that's only because it fit, and that's one of those borderline cases. It was apropos, and it was the right way, I think, to set it out. But if you're just, going for, I'm going to do something really creative and show how great I am, you lose out on both things: the getting their attention because I'm distracting them, and also convincing them because they're distracted.
Right. And it seems like part of your process here is to break down the problem into more manageable parts, right? Like you're saying, well, if I say I've got to write all this stuff and that's a real hard problem to solve, but you kind of make your first stab at it and then you say, okay, well, am I putting the ethos, pathos, and logos in there? Am I too self-referential? Am I too braggartly? And also we've all been there, right? We've all been there having to like write a technical paper or write a school assignment, and we kind of sneak something in there, like see what we can get away with, right? Sneak
Yeah.
in a little pop culture reference
Right.
or a little bit of humor. And it's also though reassuring to kind of hear that you go through it like the rest of us, right? When you get stumped,
Yeah.
you don't know how to finish it, you don't know how to really break through. And so, like, where have you really struggled? Like you mentioned about like kind of that
Oh,
probate situation, but has
yeah.
there ever been like a project where you're like, I don't even know how I'm going to continue this?
Well, I mean, I struggled because and I think it's why my writing is so much better now. Is at my last job, I'll be frank, I got fired. Well, it doesn't show up as being fired, but that's another story. But I was at the Minnesota Attorney General's office before this, and it's funny, right? I mean, I think some of the thing is someone said that an old-fashioned term for it is human respect, not to make my worth based on what someone else thinks, because I'm this legal writing guy here, and I was supposedly fired because my legal writing wasn't good enough. And that was a long process. I gave that job everything humanly possible and more. And it improved my writing, not because the person who was reviewing it improved it, but because I don't know how to put it, that I think with writing, kind of every obstacle to writing has to be kind of removed. There's a lot of internal obstacles to really coming up with the best product, and that it just forced me to overcome all those. And um, there's a term from this platform, this productivity with a soul kind of platform called optimal work, which I use all the time. So anyone who's listening should check it out. I think it will change your life because it's focusing not on just on productivity, but productivity with a soul, seeing every opportunity as a way to live my highest ideals and grow. And so one of the things they say in that, the main guy says, is that when adversity comes, you double down on best practices. It's not like I go into crisis mode. I have to double down on best practices. And that's sort of what you're saying before with structure. So I said about the Aristotelian thing, but a basic structure, and I'll say this quickly, but I think it could be helpful for anyone writing, is something called the flowers paradigm that's been popularized by the legal writer Brian Garner. And there's 4 stages in a writing process. There's the madman phase, there's the architect, there's the carpenter, and the judge. And the madman phase is that sort of mind map, brainstorm. I even do, before any writing project, I do 10 minutes of free association where I sit in a dark room with my eyes closed. I have a recorder and record just whatever comes to my mind for 10 minutes. And some really ridiculous, mostly stupid things come out, 95% stupid. But sometimes even some of the imagery or what it's compared to or what I'm thinking of gets things going. And then the architect is the outlining phase. And then the carpenter is the mad person writing, just getting that draft down, because the only thing that has to exist for a first draft is for it to exist, right? That's all you need. Right. And then the judge is where I'm going through an editing. And unless I'm doing those 4 processes really broken down, I'm an example of, if I don't follow this sort of structure, it goes apart really quickly. So I say to anybody who feels like something doesn't come naturally, that doesn't mean it's not going to come. It just means that it's going to take best practices, sometimes obsessively.
And it will take these different mindsets, these different versions of you. And there's the phrase "write drunk, edit sober," or you hear about how
Yeah.
there's writers like Aaron Sorkin who would like take like 10 showers a day, right? He gets some writing done, go and take a shower to like reset his mind. And that's very helpful and powerful to think about, that you kind of go through these different phases and hit it with these different personalities. And you're making me realize that, like, back when I was in high school and had to write essays and things like that, and if I had more time and if I revisited something every few days, it would end up being like a really nice finished product, because I could kind of do the deep thinking and go through it, especially near the end there, with a full-on editor mindset, and fully be like, okay, well, instead of trying to add to it, now I'm subtracting or rearranging or just reconfiguring. And instead of trying to scramble and saying, well, the assignment was 7.5 pages. I need to get 2 more pages written. Instead, I say, hey, here's everything that's put out there. And if anything, it could be trimmed a little bit. And that's a much more, I'm not sure if like comforting is the right word, but it's more pleasant to look back and say, okay, well, I'm in that final stage where I'm just kind of like refining and tweaking instead of just dealing with
Yeah.
the chaos and the mess.
And it's more highly motivating, right? Because if I'm getting to 7.5 pages and that's my focus, that's kind of an outcome, right? It's not, and the problem is that outcomes can be realized. And if I realize an outcome, then what happens? The great thing about ideals is they can't be realized. Like you can't get to the end and being like, wow, I'm 100% generous. I'm 100% sincere, or I've developed bonds with my coworkers or my family to perfection, right? These are things these are limitless opportunities for growth. And at least I found, some people are easily bored. My mom used to always say when I was a kid, she'd say, boring people are bored, right?
Oh, yeah.
But more than that, I'm bored because there's some lack of an ideal that I'm striving towards, because this thing that I'm doing has lost its meaning in some way. At least that's my experience. Um,
Well, speaking of things losing their meaning, I know that you are aware of, and like many writers, you deal with the newness of Chat GPT, which is quite the mixed bag, right? Because it was
yes.
it was promised to us as, hey, you don't have to write anymore, and then you go through the panic phase and saying, oh no, will I be out of a job? And then you use it, and it's so aggravating, irritating, and then some of these phrases even get stuck in your mind. Like even there's a couple of phrases that you and I said back and forth. Like I think it was something about like continuous opportunities for growth, and some of these phrases from Chat GPT that where do they even come from? They get stuck, and sometimes it becomes kind of a mess. And so
Yes.
this whole Chat GPT thing, it was promised to us as a way to make things easier, but in a way it's added complexity and annoyance. So just what are your thoughts on Chat GPT and navigating it so that way it's a tool, not a burden?
Yeah, well, let's just use it in the even bigger term. Let's say like technology, let's say like AI. I'll just say AI, because it's a great tool for a lot of different things, for synthesizing documents, for timelines. I mean, there's a lot of really useful legal usages for this technology, specifically legal research on, for say, Westlaw. The AI function is very, very powerful, and Chat GPT is useful for matching voice. Because one of the things we do here, because I write for so many other people, is we're trying to uh, what I would put is have legal writings that's the best version of that person's voice. Because that's a whole nother thing, right? It can't just be my voice. It has to be the best version of their voice if I'm writing for someone else. So GPT is very helpful for that. It's very helpful for the nuts and bolts, for synthesizing documents, for summarizing. But yeah, I agree that the problem with having something that can spit out prose is that the process of reviewing or refining or editing that prose is sometimes harder than writing it in the first place. So it really depends. I wouldn't recommend, having it as anything other than a way to synthesize, summarize documents, do something with documents, or provide a general, like basic legal overview of something. It's helpful for that purpose. But yeah, it's definitely not the cure-all, the be-all and end-all, but it can make things easier and cheaper and affordable so that clients that couldn't be served by me can. I mean, that would be one example, and because of the time savings with some of these tools. So it's great for that purpose. But if someone's expecting it to spit out something and be able to have it as a final product with very little review, that's not in the cards.
It's still not an unintended tool, and it is your buddy. And I found some of the same things that you're mentioning here in that it helps me to run circles around a big chunks of text, right? If there's like a whole book, or
Yeah.
if there's a big long transcript, like and also how many different cups do you have, by the way? That's like every time you take I need to set up like a running gag, like every time different cups. There's a blue one, there's a mason jar, there's a prescription. But
Yeah, don't worry, don't worry. The mason jar, it's water, and the prescription is coffee. So it's just
nice. And you hear that that's and on a tangent, that's like an ADHD thing, right? They say
yeah,
you have one drink for hydration, one for energy, and one for flavor. And so that way you can kind of choose your own adventure. And that's what ChatGPT helps us to do, right? Kind of choose your
yeah,
own adventure. And sometimes if I look at some big old transcripts or some big all this stuff that's written, and I'm like, where do I even begin? And then I have
yeah,
it kind of summarize, give interesting points, give a structure, and then I go back and revisit the transcript. Somehow subconsciously, I know what to focus on and what not to focus on. And I found it really helpful for like condensing text. If I have a big old paragraph, I'm like, I know I
yep,
can reduce this, and I say, give it to me in half it, and it just somehow just like condenses it, and it doesn't require that much editing. But I found like with the enlarging, that's where I get into trouble, right? If I say like,
yeah,
here's a sentence, make me 5 pages, then that's when
right.
the terribleness happens.
Yeah, yeah. I recently used it to create an abstract. We're writing an article actually on it's going to be called The Timeless Art of Legal Writing. And it's actually going to be called, what is it? Flash Backward. So it's taking that timeless art of legal writing with the newest tools in AI and saying how savvy legal writing teams can combine the two to really make law more affordable, effective, et cetera. And so I to create the 150 word abstract for the bench and bar article, I took a bunch of stuff and it was useful to kind of break it down into a 150 word abstract. So it worked well for that, but I agree. Yeah, trying to have it go the other direction is rough.
And I've noticed that even though the past week or so, that just giving it a bunch of stuff, it's really good at that. Like I've recently used it to reply to some emails. And of course I don't paste it in sight unseen, but if there's a big old email thread or a bunch of things, I'll paste the person's name, signature,
Yeah.
from email address, and it sorts it all out. And then it might give me like a list of like 5 or 10 sentences, and I say, I'll choose this, I'll add my own sentence, and then I'm done. So it's like a maybe a non-linear time saver, right? Like
Yeah.
you expect it to say, well, I wish it could take 2 hours and condense it into 10 minutes. And you might say, well, it might have taken you 2 hours before, but then it maybe gives you 20 minutes here and 5 minutes there, and it's kind of a more nuanced situation. And so there's a lot of crazy things to navigate in this world, right? With
Yeah.
ChatGPT, boredom, humor, the aggravating writing process. And so, what are you building towards now? Like, what are you working on, and what do you want more awareness, attention on from the interwebs?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the direction I'm moving and my focus from a marketing perspective, frankly, is I at a firm, Helmuth and Johnson, and so I'm working networks and whatever to bring work in. But the specific kind of marketing that's broader is the idea of marketing legal writing, mostly to small and solo practitioners, with the idea being that based on kind of economies of scale, experience, and again, some of the newest AI tools that we can be positioned, myself and another colleague here are positioned to handle legal writing needs for small and solo practitioners because of workflow and litigation. If you're a 2-person, a 3-person, a 5-person lawyer firm, you're handling things okay. Then suddenly you have this lawsuit and you have a motion for summary judgment to oppose or maybe to file. You turns out you have a client that thought he wasn't served but was. You've got a motion to default to fight there. You're on a short time period and you really could benefit from expertise of people who do this all the time. And of course, the more traditional route of legal writing marketing is toward appeals, which we also do all the time. But what we're seeing is whether in the space, especially for small and solo practitioners, we can do a lot of the legal writing for them to make it possible for them to handle their business and market and do everything else they need to do, and not have some out of the blue kind of one-time legal writing, all hands on deck thing kind of break down their whole process.
it's more modern thinking, right? Because you always hear about some of these ideas that you should be thinking about building your team and looking into a specialist, and don't try to do it all yourself, especially as you said, if there's some kind of like an emergency or something to be done in a hurry where you have to ramp up, and then there's only so much time in the day. So if you have one of these two-person law firms, and then now you have all these new writing tasks and they take away from important day-to-day that's happening now, there are other choices and options available. So if someone is saying, okay, well, I do want to explore these choices and know what Brendan and Helmuth and Johnson can do for me, what's the website and how do they know if they're a right fit or a prospect for someone that might want to speak with you?
That's a great question. I mean, so the I always have to pull up what actually is our address, right?
Well,
It's one of those
you're a
deals where I
lawyer, you
always,
need to be correct, right?
yeah, I want to make sure I'm correct and don't send people to our evil competitor, right? Like Bizarro, Helmuth and Johnson. It is it is www.hjlawfirm.com. You go under us, and I'll be there under Brendan Kenny. It's a great question, and what it really comes down to is it's pretty transparent in that, and we are, because I certainly have a pretty clear idea of kind of let's say, what the market will bear for something. So if someone calls me with an administrative law issue, which I have a lot of background in, having worked in government before, I can say, look, you write you have a letter will cost this much. The letter might work, it might not. I can give them the chances that it will. If it goes to administrative process, what it will cost. If it goes to trial, God forbid, what it will cost. And the similar thing with emotion. If someone called me and said, look, Brendan, I've got this default judgment, and it's been entered because my client wasn't, or thought he wasn't served with a complaint, but was, or maybe was, or the other side says he was, and they move for a default judgment. We have to move very quickly and get that vacated, or else we'll be stuck with this judgment that is dispositive without having any opportunity to defend ourselves because we just supposedly didn't respond. Well, I would say to them, well, get more of the background. I'd be able to give an estimate of how much time it would take, and everything. At this point, we're looking at various options, but mostly it's hourly. So it'd be like, well, how many hours would it take to do this the way it needs to be done to win? And then the question is, well, is that something that makes sense for the client? And it's kind of really that simple. It's that interactive process, because the worst thing I could do right now from just enlightened self-interest would be, especially starting off, kind of, we've been focusing on internal clients, our own lawyers here, and been doing that. And now we're kind of moving the process and the best practices we've developed to external clients, which would be primarily small and solo practitioners. I mean, if I'm taking on jobs for people and it's costing more than I'm saying, well, then suddenly I've got a bad review. It's not in my interest to do that at all. So if someone is even interested in exploring the possibility or looking at it, it would just be calling me. And I typically don't answer the phone simply because I immediately forward that voicemail onto my assistant to do a conflict check, because I can't just answer the phone and be talking about someone's case if there's a legal conflict. So it always has to be run first. So if you call and you don't get an answer, it's not because I don't want to answer. Just leave a voicemail. I'll get it to my assistant. She'll set up a call, and assuming the conflict checks run, we'll have basically a 30-minute complimentary call, and you can just talk to me about your issue, and we can see if it makes sense or not.
Wonderful. Well, it's very helpful to just hear about your dedication and your persistence and your thought process and how you go about having these conversations and solving these problems. And that phone number, according to LinkedIn at least, is 952-746-2139. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my direct line.
All right, perfect. Well, don't share it with the wrong people.
I
And
won't.
the website is hjlawfirm.com. We're talking with Brendan Kenny. And as we're winding down our conversation here, Brendan, we've jumped around and talked about all sorts of cool subjects and got an insight into you. You're a legal expert, you're a writing enthusiast, you're a dad. And in all of your travels and adventures, is there a soundbite? Is there a quote? Is there a lesson that would really apply today that really get us energized, excited, and send us on our way?
Wow. Yeah. I think it's this. I think the takeaway is that ideals are inherently motivating and energizing. And the highest ideal is building bonds with others. So if whatever I'm doing, I can be doing with the thought of connecting with someone, growing with someone, helping someone, encouraging someone. That's really the most motivating thing I can do, whatever I'm doing. And I can do that in whatever I'm doing. So I would encourage just everyone to try that today and see if that you, when if you're focusing on really developing bonds with the people around you, whether that really is a motivating, life-giving, encouraging process.
I love it. That goes back to the infinite growth you were mentioning, the
Yeah.
intangibles, right? Is there a finite outcome of how well I can connect with my family and my coworkers and find fulfillment? Well, no, it's this weird abstract concept, these ideals. And so that's beautiful and wonderful to think about. I mean, any kind of writing you make, it'll never be 100% perfect, 100% complete. And it's just the absurdity of life and of humor and of happiness and all those other things. So Brendan Kenny, hjlawfirm.com, 952-746-2139. It's been wonderful speaking with you, Brendan, and exploring some of the ideas, finding out what makes you tick. I really enjoyed it, appreciated it.
Thanks for having me.